Thank you very much, Monsignor Marcelo Sanchez-Sorondo, and all members of the Academy here today. We are already seeing the rapid development of new technologies such as artificial intelligence, virtual reality, algorithms, robots that will change the world in ways we could never have imagined up until recent years. The next 5 years are going to be seismic. How governments, regulators and industry players from all over the world treat these technologies will be very important in shaping the future countries in the developing world and their people. The unregulated nature of the internet has been credited with much of the innovation that has already happened. However, the days of a couple of students working out of a garage are long gone, and the internet and the digital age it supports are now dominated by a handful of very large corporations. The internet giants such as Google, Facebook, Skype, Amazon and many more have argued from the outset that they should be exempt from local in-country regulation. They believe that they are a special kind of species and there should be a cloak of regulatory invincibility just for them, while the rest of us in the telecommunications and retail industry must obey the law and build networks which they effectively use for free. Since the liberalization of the telecommunications market in the 1980s in nearly every country throughout the world, existing telecoms operators and new operators have invested heavily in buying telecoms licenses, paying for spectrum, and then subsequently out of their revenues paying VAT, sales tax, and universal service levies as a percentage of their revenues. All of these sources of revenue are invaluable to governments, particularly in poor and developing countries. The telecoms industry is seen as a golden goose. The public policy imperatives for regulators are very important, particularly at this time. The tax base in developing countries with small economies is very, very narrow, and more the burden of chief tax collector is falling on telecoms operators. Internet companies have shown that they really don't care that much about consumer protection or indeed privacy or licensing. Their argument is that they only deliver their services over the internet. The question I pose is, why should a different set of rules apply to Google, Facebook, Skype, as opposed to companies like Vodafone, Telecom Italia, or MTN? To say nothing about how retailers are getting crushed, particularly in small economies, by Amazon across the developing world, and retail shops are closing every day. All these internet companies live on the dark side when it comes to the payment of corporate taxes and sales taxes. In nearly every case, there is some tax haven where they book their revenues to avoid taxation. I would call on all governments and regulators to face these challenges head on and change their thinking on how they address OTT players such as Facebook compared to traditional telecoms operators. The GSMA, which supposedly is the representative of mobile operators throughout the world, have developed a policy of same service, same rules should apply. When you look at Skype, WhatsApp, and other voice and messaging services, these are the same style service that mobile operators offer, except they use the internet. There is virulent opposition from OTTs to any form of regulation, and this has contributed to an internet that has facilitated unbridled levels of cyber attacks on government services, monetary extortion, cyberbullying, personal trolling, fake news, and interference in the democratic electoral process, and unprecedented racism. These are the other challenges that governments and regulators face from an unregulated internet. I like to study history because it puts everything into context. OTTs are the new colonialists. They are akin to the sugar planters in the Caribbean in the 17th century, the rubber planters of Southeast Asia, and so on and so on. They extract huge revenues from poor and developing countries and send it back to Silicon Valley. They employ few, if any, staff in any country, and they pay absolutely no taxes locally. They are above the law. They are the modern-day conquistadores in my mind. To prevent being conquered by modern-day empires, governments in the developing world and regulators need to apply to bring OTTs into the regulatory framework in order to protect national revenue, tax revenues, their GDPs, and a flight of spending power from their economies through a lack of regulation. If you are a telecoms operator any in the world, the OTTs pay nothing to go on your network. They ride for free across all the networks and have an unprecedented free distribution model, but they also use this approach on how they deal with governments. They don't pay them either. My company, Digicel, is the largest school builder in the Caribbean in modern times. In Haiti, we have built 175 schools since 2010 and the earthquake there. We have 65,000 children going to schools in Haiti, which we have built. We have trained teachers, and we have put first-class internet access into those schools. You contrast this with the corporate behavior of Google, Skype, and Facebook, and you can see a difference in approach. Because of the decline in voice and SMS volumes, governments in the 26 countries in the Caribbean are receiving less tax revenues. The direct impact can be seen in VAT and general sales taxes, which are down 30% over the last 3 years. The reason for these declines is because customers are using OTT voice instead of mobile switch calls. WhatsApp minutes grew 100% in our last financial year, and in September alone there were 250 million minutes of WhatsApp calls. WhatsApp, because it's over the internet, obviously there's a de minimis charge for that because they're using such little data. But it's the impact on the local governments, particularly Haiti, which is absolutely startling. Over the last 5 years, we have agreed to pay a tax of 5 cents for every call that goes into Haiti. That has been generating 25 million a year for the government of Haiti that they put into educational services, where the total budget is around 250 million a year for 10 million people. Because people use WhatsApp, they're unregulated, they don't pay the 5 cents tax. The government has seen its revenues from just this one source go down from 25 to 16 million in 1 year. If you buy a $10,000 media campaign, say in a country like Jamaica, from the local newspaper there called The Gleaner, the government of Jamaica gets $1,650, i.e. 16.5% VAT, plus the Gleaner is a profitable newspaper and they pay corporations tax. However, if you spend $10,000 on Google for advertising on AdWords, the government doesn't get the $1,650 in VAT, which helps maintain the social services in Jamaica. And also, they don't pay any corporations tax because they never fess up how much corporate tax they make in a country like Jamaica. Google are going to put large local media companies out of business. Google are a rare species in the business world, as they don't pay any taxes or employ anyone locally in the Caribbean. Politicians realize that if the local media companies go out of business, If in Jamaica, for example, the Gleaner cannot afford to pay for real journalism, if all you have is fake news, then the net result is that democracy becomes seriously fragile. The UN Broadband Commission's objective was to come up with a strategy and recommendations under a new deal, where governments, telecom operators, regulators, and OTTs all have to come together to create a strategy to bring broadband to the next 4 or 4.5 billion people who do not have broadband today. We have just completed a torturous 6 months, and we have made our recommendations to the UN Broadband Commission in September under the new deal. But unfortunately, despite our best efforts, Facebook and Microsoft blocked any more meaningful recommendations, including revenue share and the financing, and actually how we would finance new broadband networks with participation from OTTs. In my opinion, as part of any new deal, all network providers, whether they are telecoms operators or Silicon Valley companies, need to give up some portion, a tiny portion of their revenue from advertising and OTT services so that they can fund broadband in the developing world. There is deep resistance from Silicon Valley and OTTs, including Microsoft, for any share of revenue to be given to this. They want to keep their existing business model intact, and you must question whether they really care about the 4 to 4.5 billion people that don't have access to broadband. A huge amount of capital investment needs to be sunk in building broadband networks, anywhere from 100 billion to 150 billion very, very quickly. And this could be done using drones and balloons, but they're really not the full solution. Nicholas has spoken to me about low orbit satellites, absolutely, but it's a mixture of all different technologies that are available. At the end of the day, broadband is a human right, but unless governments start making available spectrum for peppercorn amounts of money with strict rollout obligations for broadband, and OTT players work on the basis of revenue share, there is going to be no real change in the world we live in today in terms of broadband penetration. Who is going to build a broadband network in Burkina Faso or rural Chad? Telecom companies cannot do this on their own, and there is no business case. But if Silicon Valley plays an active role in funding these new, much-needed broadband networks, then we have a solution. Thank you.